Okay. Hold on 1 second. One moment, Mr. Mayor. Good evening. I hereby call to order the Roseville Economic Development Authority meeting for Monday, March 13th, 2023. Just took a trip back in time there, folks. With us, I should say, call the roll, please, Mr. City Manager. Boy, I just said time travel really takes a lot out of it.
Member Groff.
Here.
Member Strawn.
Here.
Member Etten.
Present.
Member Schroeder.
Here.
President Rowe.
Here. And with us at the dais here, we have our EDA attorney, Gina Fiorini, with us on my right at the end, and City Manager Pat Trudgeon, who's also the Executive Director of the EDA, on my left at the other end of the dais. We have a number of staff and guests who will be participating in the EDA meeting as it proceeds, and we'll introduce those folks at the appropriate time. We'd like to remind folks that if you have a cell phone, make sure you silence it or otherwise assure that it doesn't disrupt the meeting this evening. And with that, we'll ask folks to stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next on our agenda for the EDA is to approve tonight's agenda, and I'll just double check from staff, no changes.
No changes to the
All right, from members of the EDA, any proposed changes to the agenda?
Nope.
We do only have the two business items, so hopefully it'll be pretty straightforward. Is there a motion from the EDA to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Member Groff, seconded by Member Strawn to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we have our agenda for this evening. As is traditionally the practice with the EDA meeting nights, we'll go ahead and forego public comment on a general basis at this time and take that up at the beginning of our council meeting, which comes immediately after this EDA meeting. And so we'll proceed right then to the business items before us this evening. Our first business item is a market presentation and update on the employment industrial sector. We have our Community Development Director, Janice Gunlock, here to introduce our presenter this evening, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Gunlock.
Yeah, I just had a couple of introductory comments, members of the board. Over the last year and a half, we've been bringing these market updates forward to you. We just feel like having more knowledge about what's going on in the market helps the EDA make good decisions. We previously had a residential broker come forward. We last had a commercial broker come forward, and today we have Dan Mueller with Ryan Companies and Mike Bowen with CBRE. They're going to talk about the industrial market, although I hate to use the term industrial because a lot of times people have an idea of that in their head that really doesn't reflect what new industrial space looks like. So we like to use the term employment generating users. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Mueller and Mike Bowen, and they also have a relationship with a property owner in town who is our last sort of large employment generating user that will presumably come forward at some point for you. So hopefully you'll find this enlightening in addition to just being a general market update. So with that.
All right.
Gentlemen.
Thank you, Janice.
Good afternoon.
Good evening, President Rowe, members of the board. Dan Mueller with Ryan Companies.
Mike Bowen, CBRE.
We've got a presentation here. We'll run through a number of items. Certainly this can be conversational versus a stand and deliver. So certainly if you have questions along the way, let us know. But what we're going to do for the first portion of the presentation, share some information on the PIC terminal site that Ryan Companies and CBRE is currently engaged with Nanette, the owner right now, to find a tenant and bring that property to fruition. And then Mike will be sharing a little bit more broad update on the state of the market and the industrial market specifically. And I think Janice brought up a great point that industrial really is a blanket term. And of course, the image you have here on the screen here is the Colder Products facility that Ryan worked on a couple years ago now, and that would fall under that umbrella of industrial development. So we're excited to be here again, excited to be working with the city of Roseville again, and hopefully we've got a new project come before you guys in the not so distant future. All right, so we'll jump in here. We'll do some quick intros. We'll give a little bit about Ryan just to refresh who Ryan Companies is. We'll talk about the site and our vision for that site, a couple of examples of similar developments that we think would be great fits for this property, and then wrap it up with a market update. All right, again, Dan Mueller with Ryan Companies. I've been with Ryan about 10 years. I lead the business park and industrial development here locally. Patrick Marty's with Ryan. He's not able to be here tonight, but he'd be working alongside me on this project.
Yeah, then Mike Bowen, CBRE. I am a commercial real estate broker, and I've been in that role for about 13 years.
All right, quickly about Ryan. Developer, general contractor, and owner of real estate, family-owned company located here in Minneapolis. I think all of you guys are familiar with who we are, so we'll buzz through this. Just a snippet of some of our clients. We think a number of these would be great fits for this type of site, employment generation, the type of work that a lot of these folks do, med tech. That's kind of the theme that we'll be going with today for this site and for our vision. A couple of quick stats. You guys probably don't care too much about this, but we're deep in these sectors. Life science is the new med tech, so that's the buzzword you'll hear more often. A lot of experience there. And then, of course, R&D falls under that industrial umbrella as well. All right, we'll get into it. A quick overview about the site. Of course, this is the PIC terminal that we've been working on for a handful of months now, immediately to the east of, southeast of Colder Products, and we think it's a really great, unique opportunity. 12 acres contiguous within the loop, within Roseville, access to amenities. That's going to drive the kind of user that we want to see on this site. Next, I'm going to see if I can pull up a animation. This is something that Ryan created in-house to help our marketing efforts, and you'll see some building imagery and some site plans here that I'll ask you to take with a little grain of salt, because we're kind of going out on a limb as to what we think could be developed here. But the keys for the takeaways would be the look of the exterior. We know that there's increased design guidelines here in the Twin Lakes development area. Number of car parks is going to be reflective of the type of user, probably a second level to accommodate more office space. And again, as you'll see, the building is highlighted in the background there. It blends in very well with the real-life drone images. So that building is not built for anybody who hasn't driven by.
Changed a couple days ago.
Yeah.
So we noticed.
We'll let this play. It's about a minute long, but really does a nice job of showing potential users and potential representatives what could be on this site in the future. You'll notice as we get into some of the example projects, the inspiration for the exterior design was pulled from a mix of Colder Products and then a couple other of the Ryan developed facilities around the metro that we'll cruise through here in just a minute and then get on to the more meaningful market update. Oops. We don't need to watch that again. All right, here's some still images as well, just to give some perspective. So Twin Lakes Parkway, as you can see here, again, extending east. These are all snapshots from the video. This is a potential site plan, and you'll notice that there are some deviations from code. The Twin Lakes Code does call out, more of the front-facing facade being right on Twin Lakes Parkway with kind of promoting that walkability. Of course, again, take it with a grain of salt. We'd work with the planning and staff to figure out a mix that still fits the feel of this area, but also blends with what we think the market's going to dictate to need for parking and other loading and other items that make the facility functional that still blend with the code.
Just to clarify on this, Dan, so the 130,000 square feet at the kind of the middle section of that project information is the building footprint, and then proposed, or kind of the concept here is a two-story office facility at 55,000 feet, which gets it up to 185 in total.
Yeah, thank you. And the The idea of the mezzanine space is unique under the industrial umbrella, but again, some of the examples will show you we've been successful with those types of facilities. They look great, they're relatively economical compared to a pure office facility, but it also does make the tenant mix and the right tenant a little bit more unique, because those groups that have more office, more employees are a little bit more few and further between. This is another site plan that does conform directly with code, so we just want to call out the two differences between those two plans. And again, we're trying to show evidence to the market that this is something that's well studied, well thought of, but not being overly prescriptive on this is how the building has to lay out. So a little bit of a fine line that we toe with the market to make sure that there's something that's feasible somewhere in the middle here. Okay, we'll go through some of these success stories. And these are, again, they're Ryan projects all throughout the metro, but they fit the bill very closely to what we'd be looking for here. This is the Olympus Surgical Technology Center that we built up in Brooklyn Park. This is about 180,000 square feet, primarily office and lab space. Again, you can see the two-story mezzanine, a lot of jobs, very high economic impact for this particular development. One thing I'll call out in all of these examples, I don't know if you can see in the bottom left, it says the date that they were completed. It's probably a little small on the screen, but this was built in 2014, and maybe just make mental note of the dates and just how spread out these are, because as I mentioned, they're rare to find these types of impactful users that want to be in a certain spot, that their employees have access to amenities and everything else. So that's Olympus up in Brooklyn Park. We'll move to Kindeva. This is a project we delivered in 21 in Woodbury. Kindeva is an offshoot of 3M. They make the inhaler cartridges, and this was a group of business leaders from 3M that moved out of their campus and moved directly east to Kindeva. Again, you'll notice the great look and facade exterior design of this facility, and again, largely clean room and office, two-story office space there. And anything you'd add, Michael, along the way, feel free.
Yep, will do.
This is Kohler Products, which you guys are very familiar with. Hopefully some of you have even been in that facility. It's fantastic. Again, the theme remains two-story office, lab, clean room, and again, a broader theme in commercial real estate right now. All of our office clients are scrambling to understand how they bring their employees back to the office, and I think that will remain a challenge for some time being, but something unique we're seeing is some type of R&D or lab component that requires folks to be in the space, be in the lab, collaborating that you can't otherwise do working remote. So that's a theme we're seeing in new construction.
I'll add a comment to this. We're 2 years behind on this when this requirement happened. But Kohler Products, they built this building. I think it was within probably 6 months of this building being completed. They were back in the market for 100 to 200,000 square feet, and they ended up leasing. We did a deal with them up in Arden Hills, right at 35 and 694. I think it was 170,000 foot footprint plus, to Dan's point about mezzanine, there was like 40,000 square feet of mezzanine. So a 200,000 square foot deal that would have been perfect for the site that we're talking about here, but a couple years behind on the timing. So the next one that comes up like that, especially a group like this, that's 2 buildings away, it's going to be a great fit.
All right, we'll continue to move quickly through some of these examples. This is Curita, again, up in Brooklyn Park, 2-story office. Feel like a broken record. High finish, lab components. Again, this was done in 2019, so a little bit of a concentration in the last handful of years, but again, kind of a rare user. CSI, a user you guys are probably familiar with, just up the road. Lab, 2-story office. This is about the best looking industrial building I've ever seen, so I'd be thrilled if we could find another user that would require that type of facility again. So this is, from a design perspective, this is about the gold standard. And that was done in 2015. Any questions on any of those specific examples or anything related to the site? I know we moved pretty quickly, but that was intentional to get to more of the market piece here.
Any questions?
No.
All right. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay. These slides are probably going to be a little hard to digest because they're pretty text heavy, but I guess I turn it over to you, Mike, to give a little bit of a global update around the Twin Cities Metro and then related to the Roseville.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it pretty high level, I guess, and a couple disclaimers I'll make as well. As Janice made, apologies in advance if I overuse industrial. I fully understand and appreciate that that's not the look and feel that's intended for the PIC terminal site. Very aware of how the code reads and what the city envisions for that site, and ultimately the user that you guys are most interested in attracting. That being said, the type of real estate that Dan went through on all the slides, those case studies, that all falls within our industrial real estate world. So very much within the realm of what I work on every day. Our team, we list north of 10 million square feet of products all here in the Twin Cities on behalf of various developers and owners. So certainly a lot of exposure and visibility to what's happening in the market. So excited to talk about this opportunity. Getting into maybe the graph at the right. So that's a graph of net absorption. So it's effectively how much net positive space is leased in any given year. And then the various colors each year are simply our quarters. And you can see on the right, 2022 banner year, we absorbed 8.7 million square feet of space within the industrial sector. Keeping in mind that the majority of that does fall within like that purely, when you think of industrial real estate, for example, our team, we did the leasing on most of the Highcrest Park here in Roseville. So like the St. Jude Medical Building that Trammell Crow and Artis built, we did that deal, the Meritech stuff. So like most of this absorption is falling into that kind of real estate.
Distribution.
More office, warehouse, and distribution is really what drives our market and drives, frankly, has driven a lot of the U.S. economy in the past, really since COVID. Kind of we came out of COVID in mid 2020. In these trends, you would see these similarly for a lot of markets across the country. That kind of bronze-colored line graph coming down, that's vacancy. And you can see, even from 21 to 22, we dropped from 4.4% to 3%. I mean, 140 basis points in 1 year is incredible. You can see in the rest of the graph to the left of that, there was never anything close to that except for maybe 2012 to 2013 when the economy was still recovering from the recession. So in a nutshell, fundamentals of the market remain incredibly strong. New construction, we built about 8, and I think that's in this as well, we built about 8 million square feet of space. It's on the bottom right. So total 2022, 8 million square feet, which again was a banner year in terms of total deliveries. One thing that I'm very encouraged about with the market, even amid, recession talks and bank failures and all this, is that especially in the Twin Cities, real estate fundamentals are incredibly strong. I mentioned absorption being record high, vacancy record high. New construction is kind of the third leg of that in my mind in terms of thinking about the health of the market both now as well as projecting into the future. We're going to have less new development this year than we did last year, and a lot of that's driven by some of the interest rate risk and uncertainty over the past roughly 12 months. So far fewer developers have decided to pull the trigger on some of those new developments. So with demand being still very strong and less new deliveries coming online, I think our fundamentals are bound to stay very strong. Looking at total user demand, I just mentioned that. It's not on this list, but if you were to look at a historical view of how much industrial real estate is demanded at any given time, up until 2020, that was about 6 million square feet. And our company, our industrial department meets every month. So we track that 12 times every single year. It's about 6 million square feet of people like touring the market, considering new space. COVID hit, Amazon's going crazy, e-commerce. Within like 18 months, so early 21, we were at 15 million square feet, almost triple that. We've kind of come back to earth on that. Amazon's not, some of the e-commerce groups are not growing the way that they were before. We're still at about 11 to 12 million square feet at any given time. So, and again, a lot of that is more of that bulk warehouse and office warehouse type of product not necessarily fitting what we're looking for here.
I would say, if I can jump in though, Mike, the category that's most relatable to the type of tenants that you'd be looking at for the PIC site would fall under the office warehouse umbrella. And the idea that vacancy is low still is directly correlated to our ability to land a deal at this site, because any tenant that's in the marketplace, they go through their progression of steps, always evaluate existing options, because that's, they can see it, it's tangible, it's the path of least resistance. Only if there's, few existing options or something that's really unique about their space that forces new construction. I hate to say it, but that's really the case, because that's always, the most expensive building new. So that's kind of the last resort. Or there's a case of, there's a company that is looking for a regional headquarters facility, looking for something visible, something new that will, allow them to hire and retain employees, such as access to amenities like this site offers. That's kind of the special mix that allows, a tenant to actually execute on a new build-to-suit transaction, which is, I should have clarified, that's really what this site lends itself to versus anything that would be built on speculation and hoping that the right tenant would follow in.
Yeah, and if, I talked about the High Crest Park, like if you guys were interested in that kind of product being built on this site, you could build it now, it would lease itself. You wouldn't even have to hire me, like it would, in this type of location, anybody would love to be there. That being said, the location is still highly desirable. There's just far fewer users that are a good fit for it. So it's a matter of time and just being patient with it, getting back to the fundamentals. That's what this site and Ryan and the city have going for it. If we were in a market where instead of at 12 million square feet of demand, we're at 6 and vacancy was 6%, I'd be telling Dan, like, the odds of this thing getting developed anytime soon are probably pretty low, but I don't feel that way at all. I feel very optimistic about it. There's still very much a flight to quality of tenants wanting, as Dan said, kind of a regional headquarters. As we all know and probably read most days, labor is one of the largest hot button issues for any employer in finding the right talent. And the way that you do that is you upgrade your facilities, you upgrade your work experience, and you do so in locations like the PIC site that allow for very close proximity to retails and transportation. So for all those reasons, this thing's I'm probably not going to get a call tomorrow to say, hey, let's go do a deal here. It's not going to be the cheapest real estate in the world, but I do believe that somebody's going to be willing to pay to be here.
And one more clarification on some of the other projects that we shared. Despite them being, for the most part, other than colder products, in more tertiary suburbs in Woodbury and Brooklyn Park, within those communities, there were still well-located real estate. The two Brooklyn Park examples specifically, they're within a business park that had walkability to a Hy-Vee and, a strip retail center with Jersey Mike's and Chipotle and some other options that made it less of commodity space. In Kendeva, which was the Woodbury example, that's, tied directly into the other abundant Woodbury amenities too. So despite this location being better and, kind of thinking if other communities can land a deal like that, why can't we? I think there's still unique pieces and parts within those communities, but this particular site, I think, is something different and even better position for those type of users.
Yeah, last comment I'll make, just to kind of take all these stats and numbers and graphs and all this stuff and maybe just kind of put it into more relatable perspective. Like, I envision a Colder Products 2.0, and it's not just what their building looks like and who they are. I actually used to be on the team that worked on this site. I don't even know if you knew that, like 12 years ago, on behalf of Tony Dorso. And this just beautiful, like, not beautiful, but very well located site, 10-acre site.
Careful, Mike.
Sorry, like, phenomenal piece of real estate sat there for the first 11 years of my career, and all of us that are watching the market and we want to see good activity in the market are just hoping and praying that somebody can find a way to develop this. And I wasn't part of that deal, but my understanding there is Colder Products basically stepped up and said, like, that's where we want to be and we're going to pay to be there, and it worked out. And so
not
that's
without evaluating other options, right? I mean, they looked at, there was another site, I think the next closest stop was Blaine at the time, and that was a different value proposition for their employees when they were coming out of St. Paul. So this, I think, was a premium for them. price-wise compared to some of the other tertiary markets, but the business decisions drove that location.
That brings up a good point, Dan. The last thing I'll mention is Blaine and 35W. Maybe a bit a different story if somebody's brand new coming to market, but I don't envision that. I think this is going to be somebody who's in the Twin Cities already. Maybe it's a consolidation of sorts of real estate of a couple different locations. I'm thinking of one specific group in mind that we're talking to right now, and groups tend to. We're not going to find somebody who's in Chaska today or who's in Apple Valley today. It's going to be somebody who's most likely already located in, call it north of 394 or 94. And when you look at a competitive landscape for real estate north of 94, specifically east of the river and call it west of 35E, along 35W, as the site that I mentioned earlier that Calder Products went to in their second facility, that's now developed a lot of development in Blaine in the past 12 to 18 months. The next site's going to be at like 35W in Lexington. And then as you move further west or east, there's even fewer options. So it's not like there's an abundance of land like this for these groups to choose from.
I know we're covering a lot of ground. I feel like we're probably glazing over some topics we should drill a little deeper on. Any questions on the site?
And I know we use a lot of acronyms, so if we just use like a dozen, feel free to.
No, you've actually done
To
pretty
shut
well
up.
in that regard. Questions from the EDA members? Member Etten?
I have a point as you make your sale to these folks. You've missed some of our unique places. We have a lot of chains. You've pointed them all out, but the Grateful Table is half a block away. It's a unique bakery and a local place for breakfast and lunches. And some of the places in Roseville that have come in the last few years that are unique, high-end steak place. I mean, you're looking at a business center and you say, hey, here's this draw across the Northeast region. So I feel like you're missing some of those things, but you got Jimmy John's on there. So just as you look at that, what are the amenities? We have a park they can walk into from their property and some great local places that we'd love to include in that kind of idea of what are the amenities that are here.
Sure, that's great. Yeah.
Don't forget virtual golf and our pickleball facility that'll be just down the block.
Axe throwing.
Ash Park, yes.
Axe throwing.
And what else can you ask?
We don't want to make it too
Game time.
attractive that he don't need either one of us.
We'll tell them.
Okay, yeah.
We're just helping.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Other questions or feedback? I think just a couple of observations. Or one is an observation, the other is a question. I was just recently, for my day job, visiting a customer of mine that's been located up off County Road J and 35W for quite some time. Obviously very near that big Medtronic development that was done a number of years ago. And to get back on southbound 35W, there's sort of this circuitous route. You have to go north of J, and then
Yeah.
kind of it looks like you're going to end up on a dead end, and then there's an entrance ramp onto the highway. That used to be, up until very recently, just a bunch of trees back there, and there's like at least 5 or 6 new buildings, probably within the last couple of years, that have been put up in that whole area. Those look like more like the speculative type because they're primarily just sort of a stand-up, a distribution center or something like that. So that's just an observation that seems to fall in line with what you're talking about, both about the 35 corridor and a lot of activity in Blaine. And then also the second thing is, I know that the deluxe property up in Shoreview off of Victoria is being looked at, and I think there's actually plans being put into place, and that seems to also be something that's looking more at that sort of, on spec as opposed to build to suit, and is that kind of your understanding of what that is as well?
Yeah, Mike, you probably know more than I do, but my understanding is that of the 2 deluxe buildings, one is being demolished if it's not underway already, and that will be a spec kind of bread and butter, plain Jane industrial building. They're keeping one of the buildings. I think they've got a lead tenant that they're, if they haven't done or they're close to, for a portion of that building too. But I would say that spec building that Scannell's doing on that corner is probably the biggest competition for this site.
That's
Yeah.
the other question I was going to ask, is how it
Yeah.
relates to this site.
Yeah, that one, as I was talking about competing sites, that one came to mind for me. I mean, it's certainly, I would say, as the most competitive, right? It's a great site. I heard the deal that they were getting for one of the existing buildings might not be happening now, so there might actually be more kind of your typical bread and butter industrial development. But yeah, my understanding is they're in the process of demoing one of those buildings. That will be replaced by 2 buildings that are each like 150,000 square feet, kind of more like the stuff that you drove by in Blaine.
Maybe one last comment on the design that we have put forth for this site. I know that the shape may not be super interesting, it's just a rectangle. But again, that was just sort of our attempt to try and keep it a broad net. And also, as Ryan would be the developer of this facility, we would likely be the owner too. So there's some steps taken that we don't want to have the facility too specialized for one use, where if they, after a lease term, they vacate, we want it, applicable for the next group. So every spec building is a rectangle that, allows that flexibility for the future. And building shape and site layout, those are all important things to make sure that you're building a long-term asset. So just a point of clarification.
And from a marketing standpoint as well, the more generic the building, the more relatable it is when you're marketing it. And everybody understand, like, kind of the, one line or joke we talk about is like, whatever your site plan looks like that's not what the building's going to look like. It always goes through iterations and changes, but it's good from a marketing standpoint to keep it fairly basic.
Every user wants big, wide open space with no columns, and we can build that, but it's really expensive, so it's easier to have some columns than a rectangle building. But,
Other questions or feedback? Member Strawn.
Just, we have some realtors here, so they're probably more familiar, but kind of maybe what kind of timeline do you anticipate as far as, at least from here to maybe when you expect that you might have a tenant, and then from that time to actually having the building in place and operational? Do you have a timeline on that too?
That's a great question. I would tell you construction for this facility is probably 8 to 12 months on the extreme high end. Prior to that, you've probably got a 3 or 4 month design period and land use approval period. We'd like to run those concurrently. And then the further complicating factor would be the environmental approvals. So there'd be MPCA involvement. So I think at a minimum, you're talking 18 months out, if not 24, by the time we get engaged, understand terms of a deal, work out agreements, applications to the city, design, MPCA. So I don't know if that's the most specific
No, it's
response,
helpful.
but
Thank you.
that's about what we're targeting.
All right. Member Groff.
Since it's such a long time line, do you have your crystal ball to predict on the interest rates and how that's going to affect that part of the market?
That is a really good question. It's a question we ask ourselves every day. And I would tell you the type of user that's going to unlock this site is probably relatively sophisticated. They probably got other facilities. They probably know that for this development to be feasible, there's going to have to be flexibility built into the agreement versus here are the terms we have to adhere to, and if the market moves at all, we're blowing it up. We're doing another deal in another market that it's a sophisticated user, and there are mechanisms built into the project where we share in that risk. So end goal being a delivered facility, and we're going in eyes wide open, knowing that there's going to probably be some change and some turbulence on the way, but they need it for their business, and if there's a little bit of a concession that both parties need to make along the way, we're going to sign up for that.
And then one thing we've been talking a lot about in the last few years is sustainability and how that can be built into it, and I'm sure that depends on the client and many things, but it's just something I wanted to bring up that has been important, I think, to the council. So
That's a great point. It's something we're finally seeing as companies willing to pay premiums for, where in years past it was something that clients were really excited about it, and then they'd see the price tag and they'd kind of back off a little bit. But I think the driving factor behind that is that their employees care about it. So again, to Mike's point, if their workplace environment is better and they align with their company's sustainability goals from their business to their facility, I think it makes a difference for them. So absolutely something we'd look to capitalize on this site.
thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the information and the insight, especially as it relates to this particular site. That certainly has been one that's been on our radar for quite some time as part of the Twin Lakes redevelopment process. So, looking forward to seeing how things can come to fruition on that. And, I think back to some of our planning related to that site and other sites in the Twin Lakes, and we tried to be as flexible as we could in terms of uses we would allow and sort of building in some parameters that help to allow the marketplace to kind of work that through, because, it could be housing, it could be commercial, it could be, several different types of uses, as well as then the standards. And so hopefully we've created the flexibility that makes that work, and ultimately having a project that works is the proof in that. But certainly through the process, if there are things that we may need to talk about or may need to look at, I think we need to understand that and figure out if, those are issues we're not going to be able to get past, or if it's things we can adapt to. So
Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. Working with Jeannie and Janice on the staff side has been fantastic. They were really collaborative and transparent on the Kohler Products project, so we're looking forward to hopefully replicating that. So
good.
thank you.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that is business item 5A. The second business item we have for the EDA this evening is to discuss the possibility of a small business microloan pilot program. And we have our Housing and Economic Development Program Manager, Jeannie Kelsey, with us this evening, getting her presentation hooked up.
I don't need the,
Oh, okay.
I just wanted it.
You're
for
just
the
getting it
rest
ready
of
for later. Oh, that's very nice of you.
Oh,
Hello,
thank-
Jeannie. Welcome.
Thank you, President Rowe and board members. I just wanted to bring an opportunity for discussion this evening with a small business microloan program. In 2020, the EDA did budget for a small business loan program. The intent of the program, just for, familiarizing all of you, was for assisting with traditional financing or being an opportunity for gap financing when projects are moving forward for some of our small businesses. The loan program, it has a maximum amount value of only $50,000, but that is matched by also open to business, so it can be up to $100,000. It is at a shared risk. No loans have closed at this point, and I want to emphasize it's not that anyone's not looking at the program and that they're not being right now underwritten. It's just it's a long process for any small business to move forward for doing any improvement, or one of our new businesses is looking at utilizing it and opening up a new business. So it's a process that takes quite a bit. So it's really in its infantile stage for us to really examine bringing that forward for any further changes to that program. So we really wanted to look at some of the other things that we heard from our businesses through the whole Choose Roseville campaign. And just a reminder, we did utilize ARPA funds for that campaign to assist our businesses. It was all targeted to our small businesses. Primarily, we also did a really concentrated effort trying to identify our BIPOC members also that were in our community. And the thing that we came about from, and just from your understanding, is we visited a lot of these businesses from August of 2021 through the end of last year when the program stopped. Some of the things that we heard from some of our small businesses is that they're struggling to make some of the improvements in their spaces, and it's internally in their spaces. Some of our businesses, one of the businesses is like an expansion of her services, but she doesn't want to invest that type of money and doesn't want to have that cash in hand that she has to do for that improvement. Or another is looking at wanting to do electrical upgrades. However, having struggles, many of them all look at it that they don't own the space. Anything they do to improve the space is going to stay with the current owner, and they're not in a lease negotiation process anymore at this point that they can negotiate some of those improvements. So we really wanted to bring forward some of the opportunity of maybe what we could do to help some of these small businesses to move forward. And that is why we are bringing forward for your consideration a piloted program, and again, I want to say piloted, because we would like to utilize, at first we looked at making this as a grant program, but what we found out from talking to our EDA attorney is that we really, under statutory, cannot make grants. Even though we're using ARPA funds, we wanted to also utilize this as an opportunity to maybe continue the program after the utilization of initial ARPA funds. I also do want to make a note of that there really aren't any grant funds in the county per se for doing these internal improvements. There are existing county funds that are for corridor areas for improvement. However, we would have to have a project, and the project would have to be specified and awarded, and currently the county has some funds available, but very limited basis availability. If they only have $100,000 available for application, and again, it'd have to be identified corridor. And so as we were examining all of those things that were limited availability for how we could help some of our smaller businesses in Roseville expand and grow, we really started identifying that maybe these are some parameters that we can bring forward for conversation. And again, this is really up to the board for what you want to do and how you want to design this program. So these were just suggested. I did want to bring thought over some of the criteria that we came up with initially, was that basically we would really target this to no more than 5 full-time employees. So it's really our small businesses existing in Roseville. They have to have an existing brick and mortar, or if it is a home-based business, they're moving into a brick and mortar location. In addition, they must use the loan in connection to expansion of business operations and resulting in an increase in employees. So this is their opportunity to grow their business, and what's holding them back from growing their business. We also wanted to, since we really wanted this as a grant program, that is where we were struggling for also not having it as a grant. And so that's why we made it a very short time period for having them to report back to us of the 3 months. We certainly can make that longer. What we didn't want to do to these individuals is, what I kept on hearing is, I don't want a loan, I don't need a loan, I don't want any more debt, I already have enough debt, I don't want to take on any more. So that is kind of why we didn't want to put this longer time period on them and make them fearful that it's really not a grant, and it isn't really a grant, but it is. But we're trying to also help them identify ways that we can help them. And the one thing that we did hear a lot from our BIPOC community is the distrust of government from our whole visitation program, is that don't trust us. And so we worked really hard trying to build that trust. And so that's why we also were kind of trying to keep it on an opportunity for them to expand, but building the trust and continuing the trust with the city of Roseville. So some of the things I've identified as application requirements certainly are all laid out for you. And again, we would probably market this, again, open to business would be the one to handle this, so that we keep on making it a one-stop shop. We also would market it by outreaching to the businesses we identified, primarily through the Choose Local campaign. Also knowing that we want to make it broad as well, but really, since we have that email opportunity on a one-on-one and we built that trust, we wanted to really reach out to them, since they are the ones we heard from primarily through this visit program. And then you do have a list of ineligible businesses. I want to make you aware that all of those businesses are the same that we identified from the use of other COVID relief funds, so we're not changing that list at all. And I wanted to just highlight that maximum amount would be $5,000 per business. If they do need more than that, they would have to show us that they have proof of funds for finishing out the rest of the work that maybe needs to occur. Maximum amount that we would then put to the loan funds is deferred loan funds is $25,000. And we know that our open to business needs up 20%, so $1,000 per business, based upon the maximum amount of $5,000 overall that they would have for administering this program from beginning to end and working with the businesses. So Those are just some real highlights, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to discuss it, ask us any questions, provide us feedback if this is something that you want us to consider moving forward with any input that you may have.
Great, thank you, Ms. Kelsey. And just to clarify for folks at home who may not be familiar with the acronym ARPA, it's basically relief funds associated with COVID, and it's funds that cities have a fair amount of discretion well, a fair amount, but within parameters, to use for relief. And so that's why that is a source for this sort of pilot program as identified. Are there questions from members of the EDA for staff on what's been sort of put forward here as an outline? Member Graff.
Thanks for the presentation. That's interesting. So I appreciated the point that the improvements they make would stay with the building. So if it's a leased space that they would, and that is always a factor that I know small businesses have to consider. I'm wondering on the 90 days, just because it isn't easy, like, for instance, you just said perhaps electrical. It isn't always easy to get someone in within that time. What's the process as far as, is it when the work's completed, or how is that timeline going to work?
Yes, Member Groff, it would be upon the work completion that we would do the follow-up to see what type of expansion that this offered them to grow their business.
And how much time would they have from the time they were approved to get the work done?
That is really based upon, because it's a reimbursement, so they really would have to have, however long it takes them to get it done, is really based upon them submitting us the invoices to reimburse them for the costs that they have. That means an invoice doesn't have to be paid, but it has to be a cost that they've incurred for that improvement. And then it would be 90 days from that time period.
So do they need to have the funds to cover that before with the contract?
Based upon our conversations that we've had with Open to Business, a lot of times the contractors will not require any funds going forward, but they will require an invoice at the end for something small like this. If they do require like 50% down, then one of the conversations I've had with Open to Business is really an invoice showing that, because we don't want to just give the money to them and then they don't do the improvement. We really need to see that there's a contractual obligation that they're going to do what they say they're going to do.
Thank you.
All right, Member Atten.
In that 90 days, are there any interest or other fees that they're paying for this?
No, none at this point. Can you think of any? Because I can't at this point
Well,
think of any.
In a traditional loan, normally, each month you're going to start paying interest. That is a question of how we're setting it up, really.
Right. In this is a deferred loan with zero interest at this point.
Okay.
So they will be accruing that zero interest over that time. Technically.
Thanks for the math, engineer.
Other questions or comments? Member Schroeder.
Yeah, well, in here you talk about administrative fees. What expenses are all included in that?
So Open to Business is charging us for their services to work with the business from the beginning of taking the application in, reviewing the application, reviewing their proposed improvement, then reviewing the bids to make sure that it's an eligible expense, because it's got to be a capital expense. And then from after that, they have to do the follow-up, and they will also have to have the loan agreement administered and put in place with them, collect the data on the business, and then do the 90-day follow-up afterwards to release the loan agreement from the individual.
And do they charge a percentage or a flat?
So their percentage is 20%, so that is up to the $1,000.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Member Groff?
Just one more. Is $5,000 enough to make a difference with the businesses you've talked to?
So one business, primarily, that was the expense that she has for doing one of the improvements. Another business that I know who has expense of electrical upgrade was $8,000. And so we felt that $5,000 is kind of that, for that small business, is something that maybe is holding them back to make that improvement. And if you certainly would like to go higher, that's up for your discretion, your conversations.
Thanks.
Other questions? Great. I would do want to provide an opportunity for members of the public to speak to this. If anyone is here from the public who wishes to speak to the proposed microloan program as outlined, feel free to do so at this time. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak to this item? All right. Seeing no one, then we can return to EDA consideration. I think that, what's that? I don't know that we have any remote.
no
I
one
didn't see
online.
anybody signed up. Right. So I think the question this evening is not necessarily to approve putting this into place and all of that, but rather to initiate the process, basically. If
Correct.
it's something to,
We would
perhaps
bring
that's
it, we
what
would,
it is.
we would bring it back based upon any direction that you give us with the final resolution of authorization to start the program.
okay. Member Strawn?
I just have a question. So we're looking at utilizing $30,000. So is this one time, or are we hoping then that will, as the loans are repaid, that we would be able to continue to offer these?
The loans would not be repaid. They are forgiven after the 90-day.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So this is one time for up to, or 6 if everyone went up to the 5?
It would be up to 5 of them
Okay,
because
and
the
the
other
other would be
5.
the administrative fee.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and if I could, it's a pilot program, so we're using ARPA dollars to see how it works, and then at the end of that, if we find it successful, we'll have to look for some ongoing funding if we want to continue this program in
thank
any way,
you.
shape, or form, through the EDA levy or some other funds. But that's a decision down the road after we get through this first round.
Great. Thoughts from the EDA in terms of either whether or not to go ahead with pursuing this and any parameters we might want to provide feedback on as compared to what was sort of outlined by staff? I think one of the things that came to mind as you were talking about the one person needing $8,000 was maybe we want to build some discretion into the program where, 5,000 is the target, but we might be able to work with more. I mean, obviously that affects the ability of somebody else to get one of these loans as well. So, but on the other hand, we also have some flexibility in terms of increasing the total funding as well as an EDA because I believe we're not pushing up against the limit of our ARPA relief funds. So
We're getting there, but we still have enough money, for sure.
hopefully in a program of this size, we're
Yes,
not quite that close to
absolutely,
it. So, I mean, I don't know how we make that work, but that's just something that came to mind as I was sitting here this evening. So, Member Graf?
I would be interested in that because I just know the cost of getting things done is higher than $5,000 almost on any project I've seen in the last few years. And the contractors are still very busy, although the timeline is shortening up a little bit. So I would be interested in some flexibility on that number. I don't know how to do it, though. But
Thoughts from other members on program in the first place and any parameters we might want to look at? Member Ed?
I'm supportive of the program. I appreciate there's a job component tied to it. I appreciate who we're working with and reaching out to, so I think those are all good things. The flexibility becomes an interesting thing. You can, I understand the point, but if you're a small business and someone is able to give you 5 of the 8, that makes it achievable to the other 3 right now, and it's part of that skin in the game almost at some level. For me, it was, we hear some projects would fit under that, others would be helped significantly. That I'd rather see if we can impact some people, and if we get a year out or 6 months out and go, we're not doing any good here, then we adjust it.
That's another way to approach it too, sir. Member Schroeder?
Yeah, I support the program, and I actually appreciate your comments on having no trust between government and the small business, and this is a positive thing to help work towards that. So we show that we support small businesses and that we're a good place to have a small business, and that we would put basically money where our mouth is on some of this. So I do like the positive attributes to this whole thing. So I do support it.
Great. Member Strawn?
Thank you. I also support this. I do appreciate that this applies to people who are renters. I know that multiple times in the last couple of years, I've talked with businesses who have said, well, this isn't our building, so we are not interested in energy upgrades, or we're not interested in these other things because we don't own this building. So I think already I can think of a few small businesses, including maybe a bike store or whatever, who maybe, they wanted new lighting and things like that. That maybe would be attainable and a way to keep them after a long period of time. And hopefully, I wanted to know how rigid the adding new staff would be on that. If we were saying that they needed to expand, are we somehow holding them to that, or how is that working?
I'm going to defer to our EDA attorney on this one.
Okay. Mr. President, members of the Board of Commissioners, this is a requirement that I think gets at the public purpose of the act. In order for our government to expend public funds, you need to have a public purpose. And one of the EDA's clear purposes is to create jobs and help businesses expand, which is why this comment came from me. One of my comments was, it's tied to job creation, and it helps provide support for why the EDA is doing this.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Otherwise, I believe, all right, we would want to have perhaps a motion from the EDA to authorize the next steps in the process. Member Groff.
I move to authorize the next step in the process.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Member Groff, second by Member Etten. Member Strawn, I think.
Yeah, I only got half the word out.
Yep.
She finished.
So to authorize staff to enter, to go into the next steps of developing a program for it to come back to the EDA then for final consideration. Discussion on the motion as the maker of the motion, Member Groff.
Well, I think we've gone over most of it. I think that it's a good pilot program. I think we're going to see how it goes, and I think Councilmember Etten's comment also is that, maybe the 5,000 will work. If they need the 8,000, maybe they can do that, and it does balance it out. The other thing I do like about it is, since it's sort of targeting renters, or most of them will be that, is this accomplishes one of the goals the city would like to have of our businesses being upgraded a bit, and some of these systems being, so I think there's several positive aspects to this pilot program.
All right, as the seconder, Member Strawn.
I'm just excited to see what else we can do. We had great outcomes from our last program, and so excited to see what great thing Jeannie Kelsey comes up with this time.
All right, any other discussion on the motion?
No, support the previous comments.
All right, then we have the motion before us to once again authorize staff to continue the process to put the program together and bring it back to the EDA for final approval. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and we appreciate that and look forward to coming back. With that, there's no further business before the EDA this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Member Etten, seconded by Member Schroeder. No discussion on a motion to adjourn the EDA meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, and I'll go ahead and call to order the City Council meeting. Oh, wait, no, we'll allow about a few moments for transition. Forgot about that.